Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 186. Starting a story when you're stuck.
Do it anyway!
Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build.
Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And professional story starter, I am Michael Miller.
You know, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Michael here. He was recognized today for starting over his 1 millionth soap opera drama in his life, and which is very impressive. Like, stories he started per year of life is incredible. He outdoes us all. So
you should really watch my series on Telemundo. It's pretty impressive. Which is, I have somebody translate them because I don't write them in Spanish. My Spanish is very, very poor. I only speak a little, so I have to write them in English, then have them translated. And I think some of the romance might be lost in translation. I hope not, because I really laid on there thick. It's like, you turn on the radio station. It's like, escuchen aquí todo día y todo noche música de romántica.
Stop it. This makes me cry when you start going into that. No, my favorite soap opera writer. Okay.
So Today's episode, we actually have to throw a shout out to Charles, because this was kind of born of a thread post that he had put up, basically asking for help about. He's got a great world and he's got a lot of good ideas and stuff, but he doesn't have a story. So he wants to write something, but he doesn't have a story. So it's like, well, how do you start a story? So that's what we're talking about today. And this is obviously such a big topic. Like, forever of this podcast, we will return to this well and talk about this subject, because it's such a good one. It's such a helpful one. But we wanted to shout out Charles for motivating us to get this one out now.
Yeah. And really the way I see this one is, this is for people who they're at that stage where they're trying to begin writing stories down. And this is something I actually went through when I first started writing. But I got over it very quickly. And luckily I punched out my first novel to get through it. So that was pretty cool. But the thing is, I had many years of experience of storytelling, because one of the fears that I was getting from reading the thread was he's afraid of writing bad stories. And the simple fact is, when you start off anything that you're not familiar with doing, they're probably not going to be great. Here's the good news. If you see any story in its first draft form, whether it's for a novel or just a short story, a short story,
a short story. I love short stories. One of my favorite formats.
You did that before the soap opera writing, I believe, right?
Yes, I started with short story writing.
A for delivery, Michael.
Thank you.
But one of the things that I found is there are certain lies that we tell ourselves to prevent ourselves from starting writing, which is what we need to do. The later you wait, the more you need to start now. And so the first one I'd like to think of is I've never written a fictional story before.
That's a lie.
Yes, thank you. Just nail it right off the. You are full of fictional stories. Maybe you haven't written them down, which I doubt that you've written none down, especially if you're like outside of college. But you developed them quite eloquently as a young child, trying to get away with things from your parents.
Oh, yes.
Like I said, fictional writing is lying professionally. You, as a human, have a lot of experience in this, because we naturally sometimes lie to cover up things that we've done or things that we wish we have done. So this is just formalizing it on paper. So don't worry. You are a fictional writer. Every human being who's capable of writing can be a fictional writer.
It's true. And we got a few more things on here. And these are all just basically like excuses that are stopping you. We've certainly got more stuff than just this for you today, though. But just opening up.
We could probably do a whole episode on just excuses.
We could do a whole episode on this very next one because, as we've mentioned before, and as you've caught on a number of the interviews, most commonly is people will say, my stories are no good. Oh, I can't write fiction stories. My stories are no good. Oh, I can't publish this story because it's no good. Nobody wants to read this. It's no good.
And just like I'm going through editing right now with like a professional editor, someone who used to work for HarperCollins. And so I was very nervous in handing my manuscript over.
Really?
Because I've never, this is my first real attempt at this kind of thing. And so for me, it's like, it's you fear of hearing back that, oh, this sucks. And technically I'm a weak writer. Anyone who reads my Facebook post will gather this really quickly. If you read a lot of our old show notes, especially ones I've not had time to even look at, where they just got punched out really quickly, there's a lot of errors because technically I'm not a great writer. The good thing I have going for me is I have a lot of storytelling experience.
Oh, okay,
which is different.
Let's. I just want to qualify what you're saying. What you're saying when you use the word technically, you're mean literally the technique of writing, like
grammar,
bad grammar, bad spelling. Not technically, my stories are bad, but literally
that's part
the
of it, right?
Techniques of putting the word to
because
pages
it doesn't matter how clever my stories are, how compelling they are when people hear my stories. When they read my stories, if they can't understand them, the story is no good.
Good point.
But this is why I'm working with the editor, why everyone should work with the editor, at least to get a second pair of eyes on it if you can't get more. But the thing is, I trust me, I get this fear because legitimately I struggled with my vision as a kid, which put me years behind reading or writing skills in school.
And when he says that, he's not referring to his imaginative, creative license. He's literally talking about his eyes, his vision.
Yes, my actual vision. I had a lazy eye. I would get a headache when I started to read as a kid. I got through fourth grade before they figured out that I couldn't really read. My mom would go in and argue with them and say, no, my son cannot read. And they're like, no. We went through this picture book today and he told the story good. That's just because I was really good at telling stories. I look at the pictures. I heard the story. I would tell the story I heard based off of the pictures I saw. So until they took the pictures out of the book, I got away with it. The thing is, I get fear here. My point being, these are still excuses. The next one is like, well, let me learn about how to do a good 3-act structure. Let me learn how to do a 64-act structure. Let me learn how to make the good guys a bad guy or the bad guys a good guy. Let me find these great tactics which make very compelling storytelling.
And I feel like getting trapped in that is very much kind of an architect trap. It's like, let me learn. But at some point you have to do. If you don't do, then all you're doing is the learning. You're never actually trying. On
my business.
Go ahead.
In my business podcast, we have something that we tell our entrepreneurs who listen to us there's something called paralysis by analysis. And it's this idea that people get so caught up in the educational component to figure out how to deliver their business, they never start delivering their business. And same thing on the fictional creative side. If you get so worried about making, you want to be renowned as the best writer ever, that probably means that you have to write more than most people. And then your natural skill might fill in the gap. So, the thing is, really, writing makes you a better writer. You have to write. Another one's My World's Not Ready. Go ahead. Go back to you.
You actually skipped one, so I wanted to go back. You have Who Am I? And
I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to bring that one up.
Oh, okay. You're being sarcastic. I've heard about this. I assume that you mean... like, well, who am I to write a story? Like undercutting your own perspective? Is that where you're coming from on
that? I'm not worthy. I'm not a worthy person to put pen on paper.
Yeah. Like who am I to write a story? Who's going to listen to me? Stephen King. Now that's a writer.
Yeah. And this is the opposite of the people who are like, those published people like Stephen King aren't as good as a writer as I am. I don't know why they sell more books, which from a technical standpoint might be true. And you might even be a more creative person, but it's irrelevant, right? You unfortunately don't get to choose who you are. And you know what? And what does that even mean? Are you not worthy because you shot someone and spent years in a Mexican prison? What makes you worthy or not worthy to put pen on paper? Some really worthless people have written stuff down, and I'm sure some really worthless people have written really good stuff down. So your worth as a person has nothing to do with your ability to put pen on paper. It's putting the pen on paper or the fingers on the keyboard that make the difference.
Yeah, I'm very big on the self-defeat, and this obviously this whole first opening part is all about the self-defeat, and it's like your perspective is valuable no matter how many stories you've read where like, oh well, my story's kind of like this one. Well, it might be almost the same tale, but the fact that you're telling it means it's going to be different. I think a really great example of this is Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow. It's almost like two different people wrote it, because Ender's Game is from the perspective of Ender, and Ender's Shadow is from the perspective of Bean. They're basically the same story.
Plagiarized himself.
A lot of the events that occur in one book versus the other are occurring at the same time, but you're just following a different character. So that's kind of you. You as the writer, maybe you do write a book that's very similar to an existing book. So what? The fact that your perspective is leading the charge on that tale makes it different, makes it valuable, makes it unique. And
I'll throw in the show notes. I have a different episode listed here, but we should throw in the one about originality as well too. It's like I remember so many people telling me how original The Matrix was. So original. The most, and I'm like, this is the freaking Gospels. Get over it. I read this in freaking kindergarten because I went to a Protestant Sunday school and you had to read the Bible. This wasn't original to me at all.
See, for me, it wasn't original not for the tale, but for the concept. Because for me, I saw the concept and people were like, oh, wow, what a new idea, what a new concept. I'm like, no. I had a discussion that was identical to this, and it was in a philosophy class like 4 or 5 years ago. So the idea is actually quite old, because I'm sure that conversation has been had in many a philosophy class long before
even
I
the philosophical argument was, it wasn't original. The story surely wasn't original, but when you put them together in the way they did, it made for something that felt really new.
Absolutely.
That's what makes stuff original.
And the special effects didn't hurt.
No, it did not hurt.
I cut you off, but you had said my world is not ready.
Yeah, this is one though fantasy writers, the world builders get into a lot, and this is a real easy one. And I don't even think most people believe it. I think they just say that to themselves to make themselves feel better. And if you're saying that to yourself to make yourself feel better, that's okay. But if you want to be a writer, if you want to share your stories, even in maybe you want to do them orally on YouTube, however you want to share your stories, you got to start sharing.
Yeah.
And at some point, you don't need the entire world. You will never recreate an entire world with everything, all of the inhabitants over 400 billion years, and ever get to a story. You'll never even get through like 1 year.
Start the story. If you get to a point where you haven't created the world, like your story is outrunning your world, then stop for a minute, build that area of the world, and then keep going with the story. If
my
that's even necessary.
Go back to episode 142. That kind of lays out what I like to have for a story. You only need the world building elements for your world that you need in the first chapter. That's all you need. You don't need all of the characters. You don't need to know everything. Now, if you have a little bit more detail, it might help make a more appealing world and a better setting. But especially when you're starting off writing, especially if you're new to storytelling, you have to start telling stories every opportunity you get. Go into the Undercroft group and just lie to me. I love to be lied to. So just go. You can even make it seem like the real world. You can make it seem like a different world. Just lie.
It's probably one of the reasons you and I get along so well.
I know.
I'm constantly lying to you.
You lie to me and tell me I'm not the most handsome, attractive.
I was about to say you are handsome, you are intelligent. I was just going to say that.
Excellent. All right. Now the next one is, hey, I'll get to that after this next level.
after this next level.
Trust me, I get this one, Well, let me just finish this dungeon in Skyrim, and I'll start that writing project that I keep telling myself is really important to me because I want to share my stories. And you know what? I'm still playing Skyrim today. If I had waited till I finished playing Skyrim, I wouldn't have started.
So, it doesn't necessarily have to be just a video game. It could be any little thing that you are using as a means to procrastinate to get to the writing. I've got dishes to do, or I, have one more Crucible match in Destiny, or whatever. I gotta pick the toe jam out of my toenails.
And I get you're working some job, you're taking care of your family, you maybe even have kids. I don't know your life. And if you'd rather play the video game and that's what's more important to you, play your video game. I have nothing against that. Trust me, I like video games. If you want to go play tabletop games and that's the thing that you want to do, go do that. But the thing is, especially for the people, when you have the compulsion to share, you feel it. It's in you, you know it. And you will use that as an excuse when you're afraid to not deliver. And it's usually because you fear your quality will somehow be substandard and the worst thing ever done. At least that's what went through my brain. And from the people I've talked to, that seems to be the thing that most people are afraid of. Like Michael said, listen to the older interviews that we've done. Almost all of them were held back by fear. Or that was the first thing that came to their mind was fear.
Yeah, almost every time you've asked the question, like, what was it that held you back? It was like, oh, I didn't think my stuff was good enough. Or, I was afraid to, because I was afraid what people think of my stuff,
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to bother with that next one?
Yeah, no, it's important because, you know what? I need to go wash my hair. And it's sort of along the same lines, right? It's the rejection most geek guys have gotten in their life. I can't date you because I have to go wash my hair. I'm joking. That's the old movie thing.
Okay, I was going to say, you're like, no. I know it, but I just didn't see how you were correlating it to...
It's really the same thing as after this next level, right?
Okay, that's what it kind of feels like. All right, gotcha.
Yeah.
All right.
So, all right. Now, here are the things that you need to go before you decide what to do, right? Just ask yourself for a second, is this something you really need to do? There's need and there's want. Want is an awesome thing and is no reason to stop you, but shouldn't necessarily take away from these other things. If it's a need, you are going to feel it. It's going to pester you when you're playing Skyrim or whatever your game is. When you are sitting there, saying, who am I? Then you're like, but, because you want to, it's in you if you need to do it. It's something that you need to accomplish. If you are going to sit on your deathbed and go, you know what? I failed to even try and deliver one story to a publisher. I failed to even try and share my story to one other person.
And let's be clear, we're not even saying that you have to share your stuff.
No.
But if you want to write it, if it's in you and it's festering, then that's more of a need than a want. Because it keeps coming back. It keeps coming at you. It's a passion in you that you may not recognize yet. We're not saying that... Sorry.
Yeah. Sometimes people say, hey, my spouse nags me. But in this circumstance, you're going to start nagging yourself. And the older you get, trust me, when I start hitting my 40s and I wasn't getting there, it starts to interfere with your life if you're like me and you really need to. Because you sit there and you go, I'm just a loser and I don't have time to do this. And all these excuses get louder in your head. But it's you playing a mind game with yourself and then you're nagging yourself about it.
Yeah, and
I know some people will even get frustrated at their friends and family because of it, and it's really their own internal dialogue holding them back usually.
Yeah, and like we said, you don't have to even go Jeff's road and go find a publisher and have it published. But, if you want to write something, then go ahead and write it. Yeah. The next question you want to ask yourself is, would you want to do it if no one ever read it? If you knew it wasn't going to go to a publisher or even to another person at all, do you want to write it? Mm-hmm. Now, for me, the answer is yes. Like, I have stuff that I write that's just for me.
Mm-hmm. And that's awesome. And you know what? That's wanting to write. That's an awesome thing, and you should do that. It will feed you. If that's what feeds your soul, that's awesome. But do it. And usually it's not the people who want to write, it's the people who want to share their stuff who get more frightened about writing because they're afraid of what happens when the next person sees it. If the thing to keep in mind is writers write. That's all they do. To become a writer, to become a storyteller, you're writing a story. And the reason there are drafts are because different levels of quality come out at different drafts. So when you write your first draft, it's probably not even quite, it's probably a complete story, but there are going to be holes in it. There'll be problems with it, even in the story in the first draft. Besides the grammar, besides all the other stuff, things that you think you've explained clearly, other people won't understand. Because you explained it, but you might maybe see a few more things in your brain that other people don't get when they get the paper.
Yeah, I find that sometimes you'll have a really great idea. You'll start writing something down and you'll share it with somebody, and then they'll parrot back to you what it is they see or what it is that they read, and it sounds nothing like what you thought you wrote. And the reason for that is there's a bunch of details and concepts and ideas that are in your head, and they're part of the story, but they didn't make it to the page. So while you're writing, you just didn't fully explain a given thing, and then that changes how something is defined or how something exists within that world and within that story. And then your reader's like, oh, I didn't realize that those aliens had 4 arms. You never mentioned they had 4 arms. I'm like, oh, you know what? You're right. I never mentioned they actually have 4 appendages off their torso. So you were assuming that they just had 2 arms. No wonder that was confusing.
No wonder it was confusing when it was holding the 2 hands of the protagonist and punching him.
Yes.
Because I never explained that there's actually more hands.
Goro style. But something else that Jeff wrote here that I want to fully say here is where you wrote that keep writing first drafts until you have one that speaks to you. Just because you write a given thing, you don't have to shackle yourself to it. You can just keep writing things and changing things and writing different ideas. You don't have to keep rewriting the same story over and over again. If it really doesn't sing to you, you might have to just get that bad idea out just to get to the next one. And that process is important. Understanding that you can let things go. You can write something that's garbage, and you will. If you're writing quantity, which you should be, quantity bears quality. You're gonna write some junk, and just because it's junk doesn't mean you have to redraft it 40 times and eat up tons of time if you don't like it to begin with. If you don't like the concept, I've had ideas where it's like a fully fleshed out idea, and I'm just like, I need to do something with this, even though I don't like it a whole lot. So I'll put something to paper and then let it go, just because I needed to get the idea out of my head. Otherwise, it was going to keep coming back to the forefront of my mind and take up my conscious time.
So this next section is dedicated to the people who are new to writing creatively and storytelling. If you've done one of the two, you might not need to go through it at this level. But this is if you're truly a novice at both of these sections at getting the story on paper. This is what my suggestion is going to be. Get 2 characters from your world. Make up a conflict. The first thing that comes to mind, and remember, typically conflicts are more base. They're not highly detailed, intricate things. There's a base need or desire. And sometimes the characters will come up with they'll come up with really clever plans to get what they want, but usually the ones are very basic emotion stuff, or they're base, I just desire it's E-grain. I want E-grain. That's the reason it's all going to fall apart, is because I need a grain.
You okay?
Yeah, no, I got a little excited
No,
there.
I got it. I wanted you to have that moment.
Well, I feel a bit
you're a little flush. I totally agree with you. If you're not an experienced storyteller or writer, the 2 character starts great. One character has a need or a want, a driving desire, and the other character has a conflict against that. They have a reason that opposes that first character's desire. There's your conflict.
And essentially what you do when you write the story, don't worry about acts, don't worry about, Don't worry about subplots. All you want to worry about is writing down how character A and character B come together and how the conflict's resolved. That's all you have to do. It might be 500 words. It'll probably be at least 1,000, I'm guessing, and maybe 10 or 20,000. You'll be shocked with what you can come up to just trying to get two characters together, and you're going to come up with new characters. You're going to come up with other things, and that's fine, but you just need two to start.
It amazes me. Like, I really wish our entire listenership could have been a part of the story circle that occurred in the Facebook group, because that was such a great example of what we're talking about, where you think it's just a little thing. Like, I wrote 2 paragraphs and then passed that along to another member in our community. That person wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs and passed it along, and that person wrote 2 or 3 paragraphs, so on and so forth. And it kept going like that until we were all writing like half a page to a page. And we got up to, I think, like 25,000 words when we stopped, something like that. I don't know.
I'm not sure. It was a decent sized story.
It was a decent sized story. It got to be a bit of a complicated mess as far as the story goes. But it was an amazing exercise in showing that you take this little thing and it's like a snowball. You just start with a little piece. You start with your 2 characters, or you start with the conflict. And once you just start moving, you just start putting the words to the page, then you start realizing, oh, you know what else I need? I need this. Oh, you know what else I need? Oh, that character needs this too. And you just start adding and adding and adding and adding to it.
Yeah. But, the great thing is when you get done with this exercise, you'll have a successful story under your belt. You might not love it.
Might not be good.
You might not love it. And no matter what you do to it, you might not be able to make it good. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, as it's working out here, it's just not working. Unless you're getting paid to turn that into something, don't worry about it. Because there's a lot of times you can put away stories in your mind, little scenes that have happened that are maybe gems within, your diamonds in the rough. Or maybe later on, you'll sit there and read through it and go, well, this is stupid. But, if I had done this instead, this would have been a pretty cool story.
Where like, I can totally, this is a great idea. I can totally use this in something else down the road.
But you know what? You've gone through the act of creating that first draft. That's all it is. That's why I always call it puking out the story. Because puking out the story is just that. It's literally vomiting it out. So just keep in mind that, first drafts are not polished novels. They haven't gone through 5, rounds of editing, with the publisher to refine it into a super story. And the thing is, a lot of times those books still have flaws in them. That's why you have a first edition, a second edition, a third edition, because,
they keep finding something. Yeah, they find stuff.
So the thing is, don't get caught up on the perfection of the story. Don't get caught up on having everything prepared. This is my flaw as a cook. Like my wife will ask me to cook a little egg scramble, and I'll sit there and I can't start until I have everything prepared. And the reason is because I don't trust myself as a cook, which if you ate my food, you probably wouldn't either. But, the thing is, but to get better, all you have to do is start doing it. And you're not going to burn it, And the thing is, if it's really bad, just keep it for later. My thing is, even if it's all right, what you do then is you edit it. You go through it. You make some of those first round grammatical fixes. And you sit there and go, what do I see that I think, needs a little bit more detail? Add it in. Add in a little bit more detail. Say, you know what? This character that I brought in here and the second part of the story here in the second scene is kind of a cool character. I don't do anything with them again. Give them a little bit more time throughout the story. Start fleshing out the story. These are things, and just keep rereading through it and doing that. And if you sit there and go, no, this is pretty decent, then you'll want to find a friend like Michael, someone who's not going to BS your ass.
Yeah, this is something that's kind of an important note. Is it's nice to have friends that like your stuff, but as far as being critical goes, it's better to have people that are going to read it and they're not going to sugarcoat it for you. They'll read it and they'll be like, yeah, I gotta tell you, I have no idea what's going on in chapter 2. Like, you've got this guy who comes in, and for some reason he kills the lead character's parents, and you're like, yeah, that's the second lieutenant for the main bad guy. Like, okay, that's great, but if the bad guy didn't order him to kill that dude's parents, why did he do it? Like, he's got no motivation. If it wasn't assigned to him, then why did he do it? And then, okay, I got it. So that didn't make sense for you. All right, fine.
Or especially in world building, one of the things that I was always concerned with is I'm not a fan of over-descripting stuff. I believe people's imaginations should has a serious role to play in to reading a story.
I like that. Like, you having put that out there has actually helped my writing, because I find the same thing. Like, I like to describe a lot of stuff, and it's like, you know what? Now, instead of describing all that stuff, I like to imply that stuff. Like, I certainly will describe things. I'll tell you about the character or whatever, but it's like like one of the big projects I've got going now, I realized that I barely describe what a lot of the characters look like. I give some physical description, not a lot, but I give a lot of character description. So you have a good idea of what these characters' personalities are like, but beyond that, the reader gets to design how that character comes to them. And I like that. For me, I think that that's really cool. It gives the reader agency. As we've said before, that it's definitely me, I believe that reading is an interactive relationship between writer and reader.
Yeah, and I said it because I prefer to do that when I'm reading. And Michael and I talked about this in movies. A lot of horror movies are ruined for me, monster-wise, when I see the monster. So this is something that really hits to me because I don't like that kind of fiction. And some people do. There's nothing wrong with that kind of fiction. But for me, but still, you need enough that the people understand it. You know, like, why do they keep looking at that person's eye? You know, to me, you need to give at least one little detail with it to make the eye distinguished, right? Like maybe it's gored out or it's a different color than the other eye. You know, you need one detail there so the reader understands that it's unusual. They need some reason that it's unusual because you also don't want them to struggle on a minor detail about a character's look. So keep that in mind, too, as you go along. Let me go check. I haven't heard from my wife yet. Let me go check.
So yeah, the big point is find someone who can read the story for you. This is after you've gone through it a few times and kind of fleshed it out, and someone who's not going to BS you and sugarcoat it for you. Have them give you legitimate feedback.
And you know what? For me, a lot of times you're just done at that point. The story might not ever go anywhere else, and that's fine. You know, or maybe like, you know, when you start like actually like releasing books or trying to share your stuff out, maybe it becomes free content you share out. Maybe you just use it as a way to develop your world, develop it through stories, because things don't develop cleanly. And a tendency when we have a tendency when we world build to make things a little too logical sometimes. Even for logical races, there are illogical things that go on. And those things typically come out better through stories. When you develop, it'll just help the world itself feel a little bit better. So it's also a good way to help develop your world is just to use storytelling. But, you know, you go through it, you edit it, work out with a friend or two, and maybe you leave it there and never touch it again. Or maybe you take a scene from it here or a character from it there and use it for your next story. But the trick is to become a good story writer, you have to write stories. So start writing the stories.
And then edit the story. And then go through it again, edit it again, draft it again, have a friend read it, and then draft it again. And then
my suggestion is
call it done.
Yeah. Or if you go through it and it's really pretty horrible and like you like this makes no sense to me, when you read through like your first draft and it just you're not liking it at all, or maybe you're like, this is just, I'm done with it, you can put it down at any time. But, you know, even if it's, as long as there's interest in it, get through at least this phase, because it will help you develop to become a better storyteller. That's how you'll know you're becoming a better storyteller. Because like maybe the second time there are a few less things that the friend is confused on because you think about them as you're writing. It comes out into paper quicker. You know, it's like my first to third book my second and third book were much faster to write than my first one.
There's two things that we're saying here that are actually kind of contradictory, but I think it's important. Well, it's important to identify them and put distinction on them. One, writers write, so keep writing. If something is terrible or you don't feel like developing it or it's just not something you're into, let it go and then write something new, write something new. But the process of writing a thing, calling it a complete story, rewriting it, editing it, having someone else read it, edit it again, and then calling it a done story. That process is important for you learning the story process. If you just write an idea, it's incomplete, you start a new one. You write an idea, it's incomplete, you start a new one. You write an idea, it's incomplete, you start a new one, and you never complete anything, then you're not finishing any stories. So you definitely want to pick one, even if it's not your favorite, even if it's not your best idea, and just commit to it for, a week, a month, whatever it takes. Write it out, edit it, complete it, have someone else read it, re-edit it. Just go through that process. Just give that process a try, and you'd be surprised how much you will learn just from doing that. I feel like because we're coming to the end of the show notes here, and there's so much more that we could talk about. So I think that we're going to have to save it for another episode. But I kind of want to get into something about when you talk about mission statements for a story, and when I talk about what a story is really about. I kind of want to have a brief discussion about that before we close this down. Are you down for that?
Sure.
So Jeff's a firm believer of having it beforehand. And while I would agree, sometimes it's in you, but you don't realize it. And that is the mission statement. So you have a story, and the story is about, aliens and gunfights and, space marines and whatever. But what the story is actually about is completely different. What the story is actually about is love and family. It's told through the guise of aliens and space marines and, gunfights. I have a zombie book that I've been working on for a while now. And I didn't have a mission statement when I started the story. And it's like a half-complete novel. And I then realized what it was actually about. And the bigger point here is to know what your stuff is about. One of the reasons you may have difficulty starting a story is because you don't have anything to say. So you may have to sit down and do a little self-reflection and think, what do I want to share with people? Even if that idea is very simple, it could simply be, you know what? I want the reader to be kind to others. Very basic idea. But I'm going to share that message through 2,000 words of wizard combat.
Of orcs raiding a village.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So consider that to write a story, you may need to know what you want the reader to get at the very core of things. It's usually a one-sentence message. It's, what do you want to say? Now, sometimes that message is terribly complicated. And I don't mean terrible as in bad. I mean terrible as in grand. Messages out of Tolkien were pretty grand. But you look at all the complexity of the writing, and certainly
one of the reasons why it was an epic.
Yeah,
it's hard to get to grand storytelling or grand to give out grand visions and small scopes.
Yes, but the bottom line is you may have difficulty writing your story if you aren't considering that the crux of a story is you're trying to convey an idea, and it's usually a relatively simple one. So consider what you want to say and start there.
And one of my suggestions, too, with mission statements is I typically reserve for that more when I'm writing books, where it's like the goal is a book from something. But the thing is, I would suggest, even if you're not sure what it is, write it down. Realize it's not handcuffs, though. Because
definitely. It can change.
Once you start writing, the outline's great to have there, and you're still going to use 99% of it. But the way it gets used and sometimes shifts as the story is told, because the story pulls you sometimes, and you should let it happen when it does. But have an idea of where you want to go. And the thing is, when you're done, if it's not that, just say, what really was it? Oh, wait, it was that, because reading the story will tell you.
Yeah, the outline's kind of like a battle plan. How is it they say that a battle plan is a good idea until the fighting starts, and once the fighting starts, things change dramatically. That's kind of like the outlines.
I think it's a battle plan is good until the first shot is fired.
Yeah, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
So the outline is great, but don't strong arm your story to fit the outline if the story wants to do something else. Like, if you find your story is going so far off the rails that the outline is no longer applicable, save that outline, write another story off that outline, and just continue writing the story that has taken over what you started.
Yeah. Or sometimes you'll find out that the thing that you think it's turning into ends up only being a subplot.
Yep.
I've had subplots that were pretty good that have come up from characters that I just chucked into a story to flesh it out. And then you're like, well, this is really cool. I need to do a little bit more with this.
We did that with characters.
Or sometimes it might become the story.
We've done that with characters that we created that you decided you were actually going to use, that you weren't even going to put them in, and then you decided you were going to put them in.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that is true, because I like the character.
So, closing this down, what is the Worldbuilder's task of the day? Because I'm sure it is completely unrelated to what the subject of the show was. Okay.
It always is. So for this, ignore what I've said so far. Write a first draft of a story. Ignore the word count. Ignore the freaking tactics and ways to write better stories.
Yeah, don't worry about 3-act structure.
Write a story, beginning to end. A couple, and keep it a small in scope. A couple characters with a conflict, solve it. That's a story. That's all you need for a story.
And you know what? I feel like this is. I know I'm getting us again a little, on a tangent. But this reminds me of script writing, and this is something that you and I really don't talk about. But something that I do have experience with, both from doing some script writing and also doing a lot of script reading when I worked in movies. It's very common that people will write a script and it'll be grandiose. Well, it's hard to get money and get backing and get funding and thus get a movie made when it's written grandiose. Sure, grandiose is great. Look at the stuff that Luc Besson is putting out. It's unbelievable. But if you're trying to write a script and a small story, like a small story is kind of like a first script. If you're trying to get a script made, what really, really helps is what I call writing a script to be shot. So you can write your stories this way. Writing a script to be shot means that it's almost impossible to not get it made because, 1, very few characters. That means very few actors, very few people that you need to pay. 2, very few locations. Very few locations means not a lot of places that you need to rent and not a lot of places you need to move the story and subsequently the crew to shoot it out. So few people, few locations, few complexity. Now, because you're writing a story and you're not trying to sell a movie, you can get heavy into your science fiction, your wizardry, and the special effects are you writing them down.
That's right.
But in script writing, I have seen some really, really amazing movies where most of the movie took place in the same room. There were almost, no other locations and very few actors, and they were brilliant movies. Go watch the movie, I think it's called Circle. And I'm not talking the new one with Tom Hanks. It's an older movie. I think it's called Circle. I'm going to have to look that up. But basically, it is people standing in a circle in a room, and they all are voting on who gets to live and who dies. It's a very simple concept, but the way it's delivered is brilliant. And it's one of those stories that, like what we're talking about, it's not complicated in scope. So,
and I'm going to slightly modify the real world task based off of what Michael said.
Okay.
And this is for a lot of times, fantasy writers have more epic stuff in their head, right? And a lot of times it involves, especially with, Martin out there now, a lot more courtly intrigue. Write a short story for your real world task. This is a completely different one than your world building task. That's a court intrigue scene. It's like, think of it as almost like the climax of like a bigger story, but it's in a king's court or the emperor's court or whoever's court in your world, and two characters, one character, the protagonist, has a goal and the antagonist is involved in it somehow. Write out the story of all of the events that happen in that room to get from the time the protagonist enters until the conclusion of the actual story. And then if it's good, turn that into a story idea. Make that your climax. How do the characters get to that point? Work backwards to the story, like write the climax. It's a scene, but involve all the story elements in it. Where it's like you're taking two characters and you're telling the story of what happens in that final moment. Maybe it's a few hours, maybe it's a half a day, but it minimizes the amount of time you're writing about. It minimizes the locations you need, but it allows you to get a full story structure into one scene.
The idea of working backwards, I think, is a cool one. I think that's something that is not done often enough, where you actually start with how you want things to end. And you say, okay, well, if that's how I want to end, how do I get there? Well, if I want to end here, then it has to go here to get there. And then for it to get there, it has to go here to get there, and so on and so forth.
But why does he hate him so much?
And
I need something to make him hate him this much.
Okay, yeah. Exactly. So you work it backwards, and that can give you most of your story. Like you're like, oh, well, I want it to end with the hero triumphantly having a small army behind him after victoriously defeating an enemy in a foreign land. And okay, well, all right, now we got lands and armies, and so there's political reasons, or maybe just basic needs reasons, like they have to take over that land because they got better farming territory. And there's an army, which means there's organization and small government. And if it's an army, then they have weapons. That means what kind of tech level? You know what I'm saying? Like all of this starts creating, like, once you have the start of the snowball, it just starts pulling more snow onto itself as it rolls down this hill.
Yep,
So.
and then the full length of the story is like, how do you get to the climax, and then you wrap it up. So it's like a good climax can be an entire story. Some scenes are entire stories. Maybe not all of them, but many scenes are an entire story. There's a small conflict being dealt with that'll allow you to get to the bigger conflict. So maybe think of it that way too. So, write a good climax story. And then if you like it, write a whole story about the climax. Or how you get to the climax.
Huzzah.
Thank you so much for listening to the World Builder's Anvil. We would love it if you would share the World Builder's Anvil with two of your friends, and so would they. If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting by showing them Stitcher or iTunes, or, best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com. That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.